Hello, everyone. So I'm back. I last talked to you on July 4th. I did my first solo video on Amy's channel. And then I went off to Boston for 3 weeks and kind of left you hanging. I did a project with Mark Headley, who you know from Blown from Good. And we had a lot of fun there. And I just got home. And yeah, it's fun. Kiwi is like twice the size he was when I left. He's doing real well. Him and Mango, they're doing real good. You'll probably see him during this video running around behind us playing. But let's see. There's a lot of things I could cover. I think the first thing I'll do is kind of expand on one of the points I brought up earlier in the last video, which was that Flag had added a whole lot of delivery billing and yet had not increased its value of service delivered. I pointed out that at the Sandcastle in 1990, I believe it was, they put a whole huge delivery building added on there for the upper levels. And then a few years after that, we had the Superpower building. And I explained why it broke ground when it did and all that. And one of the things I wanted to point out, which might not be so obvious, is the size of the Superpower building. It's 377,000 square feet. To put that in perspective, the Fort Harrison, every floor is 10,000 square feet, which means that the Superpower building is equal to almost 38 floors of the Fort Harrison Hotel. I mean, just think of that as far as size. And even with that added to the ability of the organization to deliver as far as space goes, it didn't increase its statistic. It still had the same level of, or less, of value of service delivered as it did in the late 1980s, believe it or not. In the late 1980s, the Flag Service Organization had the value of delivery was around 1.5 million, and they were consistently above $2 million of income a week. By the early 1990s, the income was having trouble staying above 1 million, just to give you an idea. And it pretty much struggled in the 1.3 to 1.7 range for the next decade. As far as number of staff at Flag, it reached its height in the late 1980s. It had about 700 Flag Service Organization staff and then Flag Crew, which handles the hotels and the transport and the food and all that kind of stuff. For public and staff, they had 200 staff. So you have the organization growing like in leaps and bounds as far as the billings go, which is very expensive. I mean, you know what it must cost to heat and cool a building the size of the Superpower building, or to clean it, you know, to maintain it, with no more staff than you had 20 years earlier. I mean, it puts a big burden on the organization. So, like, why are they doing it? One, because it makes money. They talk to the public and they tell them, oh, this building is going to be the solution to Scientology. It's going to make, you know, the possibility of Scientology expanding and clearing the planet and, you know, doing all these marvelous things if they had this building. So you get the public to be given over, you know, tens, if not $100 million to do one of these buildings. And that all counts towards assets and reserves, which is David Miscavige's statistic. And so he's all proud. Look, I'm building up all this money and all this value in property and all this kind of stuff. Great. Scientology's not expanding. It didn't get any bigger. I mean, you can have the biggest McDonald's in the world. You know, it could be 100 stories tall. But if you got the same amount of people coming in to buy your burgers and you got the same amount of people making the burgers, you're not going to have any increase in delivery. And that's kind of what you see in Scientology. I remember in 2002 when I was the Treasury Secretary for the Flag Service Organization, management wanted to know how many active Scientologists are there at Flag. I mean, Flag makes over half the total income, over half the total value of delivery for all of Scientology in the world. So how many public do you have there? You know, and Scientology is claiming to have millions of public and this and that and 5x and 10x and 50x expansion. And you're hearing all of these kind of claims at the international events that are being, you know, pumped out to the Scientologists. You take how many public have actually taken at least $1,000 worth of service over the last 3 years. So we printed out the list, and it was only 5,000 people. And we were like, no, that can't be. So we double checked, we triple checked. Yeah, there was only 5,000 active Scientologists at Flag. That counts the locals, the people from wherever in the world. There was 5,000 people, which is minute. And but that's the true situation. I also remember in 2002, all the divisional heads and all the executives from the Flag Service Organization were called up to the conference room, and all the statistics, all the major statistics for the organization for the last 10 years were all laid out. The graphs were all laid out on a conference table. And one for one, those graphs weren't just downtrending, like slightly down. They were steeply down, which in Scientology is called a danger condition. It's when it looks like something rolled off a mountain. It's just like, and that's what every one of those statistics were. So this concept that Scientology is growing and expanding and all this kind of stuff is false. And a lot of money and a lot of effort is made to give that appearance. You have, they can show these huge building. Oh, we got this huge superpower building. We got, all this new building at the Sandcastle. We have all these ideal orgs, which is some kind of scam where all the different organizations of Scientology, they're public or pressured. Like, you have to donate your money so that we can make this big building, because when we do that, Scientology in your city is finally going to expand, and you're responsible for your city and all this kind of stuff. So these people, they go into heavy debt. They empty their bank accounts. They give all this money over to Scientology. They get this big old building, but they still get the same amount of public. They still get the same amount of staff, and there's no expansion. The only thing that expanded is the bank accounts of, Scientology International. The local organization does not own that building, even though they're the ones that raised the money and did all the work. That is, those buildings, all those buildings are owned by Scientology International. And then Scientology International then charges them basically like rent to be in those buildings. It's quite a racket. So I thought you should know about that. Let me see what else I would like to go over. Flag isn't the only area where they've poured tons of money to give the false impression of expansion. I mean, you can take the Free Ones, for example. The Free Ones, you got this huge ship. It's supposed to be there to deliver OT8. And how many people are on OT8 at a time? 5, maybe? Maybe at some time they might get up to like 7, 8, 10 people at a time being there for like 3 weeks. You don't need 150 Sea Org members full-time, a huge ship with all its expense, to deliver OT8 to a handful of people. I mean, you can put that in one corner, one floor of the superpower building. You could dedicate, if you want to, keep security, dedicate a whole floor, give them like, 100,000 square feet. Who cares? It's, it's just pouring money into the ship to make it look like there's some kind of expansion, and it's all about image and stuff. And the fact is, the Free Ones get supported by the Flag Service Organization. And when it first started up, you don't want, in Scientology, you don't want to take handouts. You're supposed to be able to produce and cover yourself. So they got so desperate on the Free Ones that they decided to sell OT 9 and 10, which didn't even exist. There was no such thing as OT 9 and 10. I mean, how could you set a price on something that doesn't exist? Are they going to take 2 months to do? Or is it going to take 20 years to do it? They just pulled a number out of their butts and started selling it. They literally sold millions of dollars of OT 9 and 10 to Scientologists without having any idea what it even was, because it didn't exist. I mean, talk about a straight-up ripoff. And then Miscavige started telling people, oh, yeah, we're not going to release it, and 9 and 10 until all your OT8s are really ready for it. It means you have to do all this training. You're going to have to do all this auditing. You're going to have to do all these preliminary things. Plus, you're going to have to make all the organizations go, St. Hill size or become ideal orgs. So you need to take responsibility for that. So he just hung this carrot and dragged these people along. tell them that all these things they had to do and all the money they had to spend to get something that didn't exist. And eventually, what he did was he said, you know what? Actually, I checked all your folders. He literally said, I went through all your folders of the people that, you know, the thousands of people that had completed OT7, and none of you guys, unfortunately, you didn't audit it right. You're going to have to go back and audit OT7 correctly, and I'll tell you how to do it. No. So, for real. And so these people are like, holy crap, I need to go back to Flag now and do OT7 and all that, you know, the training and stuff over again. But my money, I already gave all the money I have over to the free ones, and it's on their account. And it was like, oh, no problem. What we'll do is we'll do paper transfers. We'll take all the money that you gave on account to the free ones, and we'll transfer that to Flag. Not the money, but as far as moving the numbers over, instead of now you have $100,000 at the free ones, now you have $100,000 at the Flag Service Organization, and the Flag Service Organization will take on the obligation of delivering on that. And that's what we did. I was a TRESEC at the time, and we took on all that, you know. Of course, you had a lot of Scientologists at the time, like just calling bullshit on the whole thing and walking away. I mean, it's not so easy when you've been in Scientology long enough to get up to OT7. You've now spent probably $1 million. You have family, you have friends, you have your business connections. Everything that you have is tied into Scientology. So even if you realize that you've just been conned, you really can't say anything about it unless you want to get declared a suppressive person and lose contact with your family, your friends, your business, all that kind of stuff. So it's all blackmail, it's all leveraged, it's all, you know, declaring people a suppressive person is all part of how Scientology controls and keeps everybody in line. And it's nasty. It's a nasty deal. Let's see what else you should know. Oh, I mean, there's so much bullcrap. Well, they actually at one point they canceled everybody's training certificates, believe it or not. I'll just throw this in there just, you know, to see the craziness of it all. It didn't even matter if the person was personally trained by L. Ron Hubbard himself and they had been auditing for like 30 years. All their certificates were canceled. Why were they canceled? Because David Miscavige said, well, you know, I got a better idea on how people should be trained. And if they weren't trained the way I think they should be trained, the David Miscavige method, then it doesn't count. It doesn't count that they're actually trained. So they have to retrain at their own expense. I mean, they're having to buy all of those training courses again at full rate. And, you know, there's like taking no responsibility. Same thing with the OT7. The person you're going to do OT7 again. Well, these people were paying $2,000 every 6 months to have somebody supervise their auditing. And, you know, they were paying Flag to supervise to make sure they were auditing correctly. And now you're saying, oh, no, all you guys did it all screwed up. Well, but Flag takes no responsibility to say, well, obviously it's our screw up. You know, if we direct you to do it that way and we supervise you and passed you that way, and we even gave you a certificate that says you're an OT7. I mean, and if we have to now do a recall and say, no, all you guys are screwed, you have to do it over, you would think that, you know, Scientology would take some responsibility for that. But no, Scientology takes no responsibility for nothing. It's always the fault of the person. You know, it's you had out ethics, you know, skipped a gradient, you falsely attested to something, there's like, I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and how it's the person's responsibility and never the organization's responsibility. And that's like Flag and Scientology in a nutshell. All right, so, oh yeah, I was going to talk to you about some of Scientology's crimes and stuff. If you followed Scientology at all, if you followed the Danny Matheson trial, these kind of things, you know that Scientology has always been involved with crimes, and they lie through their teeth. They say, oh, we don't tell our Scientologists that they can't report crimes to the police department. You know, that we would never do that. Of course, it's their policy. Of course, that's what they do. I mean, you go into a Sea Org organization and pick up a phone, call 911. You will not reach the police. It goes to a person that's at like a central place that sees that you're trying to call 911, and the operator, which is a Sea Org member, will pick up that phone and get you settled down and taken care of, but you're not calling 911. And same thing when I was at the international base, and I was in charge of security. L. Ron Hubbard wrote a dispatch, wrote an order, and he said, what I want is set it up so there's a board in security that you can't see. It's kind of like low underneath the counter. And it has a little light bulb. And each one of those light bulbs represent an outside line on the base. As somebody picks up one of those phones, the little light bulb lights up. And there's a button you can push, and you're listening in on the phone call. And the whole thing is to prevent somebody from being able to call for help or call to give information about what's going on at the base or anything that wasn't going to be wanted by Scientology. There was a whole secret listening system to make sure that nobody could use the phone system in a way that you wouldn't want them to use it. I mean, that's how covert the whole situation is. So no, you're not. If you follow the Danny Masterson trial, you really got to see how Scientology will take really bad people doing really bad things and cover their butts if it's in their own interest. They're not going to go to law enforcement. And a lot of times they're not even going to make the guy stop doing what he's doing. If he's paying money or he's a celebrity who's representing Scientology in a way that they think makes them, gives them more power or more money, they're going to just like nudge it along. I mean, you got the Office of Special Affairs, OSA. That's a huge part of the Sea Organization. That's a big, network of Sea Org members, and they're only there for to silence people who want to speak out, speak the truth about Scientology, or cover for people who have done crimes. I mean, I've seen a lot of it because when I was the Treasury Secretary for the Flag Service Organization, I always had to make sure I kept money set aside for emergencies. What kind of emergencies? How about an adult doing something they weren't supposed to a child? And the way Scientology would handle that is to get usually both of them like quickly out of the state and not report it to the authorities. I mean, I could start naming names and things like that, and but I can tell you that's how it works. That's how it works in there. They get covered up. Scientology's not worried about the individual, whether they're a Scientologist or a Sea Org member. They're only worried about their own reputation, their own money, and whatever it takes. There's other crimes too, besides sexual type crimes. There's also, I remember one time, I'll just give you a story, just to give you an idea. There were a bunch of robberies happening. The bookstore was robbed, the International Association of Scientologists office, which they read lots of money and keep money in their office, that was stolen. There was people's hotel rooms in the Fort Harrison, the Sandcastle, that had their money stolen. You had, at the time, there was an outside company. The Fetchbacks had a company in one of the buildings that we were renting, and their office was broken into and their money was robbed. And there was a lot of this stuff going on. So I was put on a mission to get to the bottom of it, find out, who's doing all these robberies and what's, it was out of hand. So one of the things I did was they had this type of powder. It's real fine, and you can put it onto something like money or inside a purse or something. And if the person reaches in there, they get this powder on their hands, and it reacts with their sweat, their body, and it turns purple. And you can't get this purple off for like at least a day. It's nasty. So I set up. There was like robberies. People's purses were being taken around the pool, at the sauna, and in the different restaurants. So I set up some bait, some purses and things like that, with a few bucks in it with some of this powder. And I caught a bunch of the little guys that were stealing money to be able to buy soap for themselves or do their laundry, or, I mean, they weren't taking big money. They were just, picking up 10, $100 at a time or something like that. And, I'd see one of these guys walking around, they got purple all over their face or something because they had it on their hands, didn't realize, then they rubbed their face, and it was like kind of ridiculous. So I caught the little guys, and, they just get sorted out. But I eventually got to the big dude. And this guy, I had worked with him in renovations before. I knew him well. In fact, his parents were in charge of Criminon for Florida, believe it or not. These are the guys that are supposed to help sort out criminals and all this stuff. And so they represented Criminon for Florida, his parents. And this guy's name was Rene. And, I'm thinking, okay, I'm looking at where all these robberies are happening. I'm thinking this person has to have access to keys and stuff like that, or, to get into all these spaces. And I checked out this gym bag that Rene had, and he had a loaded 44 handgun in there with hollow point bullets in it. This dude was out of his friggin' mind. And I pulled him in, and, he was trying to, circling around on it, and I just kind of nailed him down on it. And I got him to confess. He wasn't just doing these robberies on the base. He was literally going off base and stealing out of homes. This dude was on it. And his job at the time was he was responsible for the Coachman building where all the training was happening. And so his job was to keep it all stocked up with, toilet paper, and keep the bathrooms clean and the building clean, and, all that stuff. And this guy couldn't get any money through the financial planning, which is typical, especially at that time. You couldn't keep toilet paper in the bathrooms because there wasn't enough money to buy the toilet paper. And if you had toilet paper in there, the staff would be putting it in their pockets because they had no toilet paper when they got home or whatever. It was just ridiculous. Anyway, so this guy was stealing money from the church and from Scientologists, and then taking this money and buying toilet paper and cleaning supplies and different things. It was pathetic. Yeah, but he never was turned into the police, of course. And, he wound up getting declared and gotten out of there and stuff. And, hopefully the guy got his life turned around or whatever, but that was just one thing that was going on. I'll tell you another story. When I became the captain flag crew, I had just gotten on post. This was 1988, and I get told that one of the new recruits, this old man, was put into the engineering department. And the engineers, there was only two other engineers at the time, Red Conway and Ernie Ward. And these two engineers were supposed to take care of the whole property and all this stuff. The place was a disaster. The boiler rooms and stuff, they weren't being taken care of. And the engineers, they knew if you went into the boiler room over at the sandcastle, you had to open the windows and turn on the fans because the exhaust in there could kill you. And they failed to tell this guy about that. And so he went down to the sandcastle to do something in the boiler room, and the fumes got to him, and he died. He literally died. And OSA's trying to cover it up, they're gonna. His family's not Scientologists. This guy's. They're telling the family that he died from a heart attack. Well, he didn't die from no heart attack, but nobody's supposed to know that. And, there's only a handful of people that know it, and I'm told that there has to be what they call a head on a pike, right? Somebody's got to go down for this, Nobody's supposed to know what happened, but somebody's got to get a head on a pike for it. So I call Ernie and Red into my office, and I said, man, this is screwed up, OSA wants somebody to go to the RPF for this. So Ernie's like, well, I got a wife and a young daughter, and I don't really want to go to the RPF because then I won't get to see them, and that would be a real problem. And Red says, well, I'm not married, and I've been in the Sea Org for 15 years, and I've never had any auditing or any training on how to do auditing. So I really, despite all the work I do, I never got to receive any Scientology. So if I go to the RPF, then I see that as an opportunity to both get auditing and learn to audit. So he said, I'll go do the RPF. And he did. Red went and he did the RPF for this accident, and that whole thing was covered up. It's just typical of Scientology. They're going to cover that kind of stuff up. I mean, one of the guys in OSA, his wife got attacked in one of the hotel rooms at the Sandcastle, sexually attacked. And that person was a veteran Sea Org member that attacked her. And that was never reported to the police. That was covered up. It was one of OSA's own, and they covered it up. And that Sea Org member, he wound up going to the RPF, and he's probably there to this day, as far as I know. But yeah, that actually happened. Another, at the time, the person who was in charge of OSA, her name was Mary, really nice lady. Her husband was in charge of collecting money for the Way to Happiness. You know, this whole Way to Happiness program, these little booklets, you know, you send them to an area and the world changes and the sun comes out and all these beautiful things. And this guy, his name was Dick, and he would get about, I don't know, $80,000 a week he would collect off of Scientologists for this campaign, that for these booklets that, you know, the church would print out for like pennies on a dollar and make a big profit on it. Anyway, at one point, Dick was given this young girl from South America to be an assistant for him because he was making so much money. The church felt, well, if we give him an assistant, he can even make more money. Well, let's just say, without getting this video canceled, he took advantage of this young girl. And that girl was immediately put on an airplane and sent back to South America. And Dick, he had his hand slapped. Why? Because they're not going to send him to the RPF. They're not going to report him to the police. They're not going to kick him out of the Sea Org. The dude's bringing in too much money. And so he was covered for it because money is everything in there. I mean, if you can make money in Scientology, you're the king. Nobody can touch you. You are like, you can do pretty much anything as I just explained, and your butt will be covered. So that's one thing to know. Let's see, what else did I say I was going to cover? I know I mentioned the Lisa Marie Presley thing, and I'm not going to go into that because it's personal to them. Plus, a lot of the information I got on that was from my brother, who was being security for Lisa for like 7 years, her family and stuff. He would come to me because he would be put in a really bad position, my brother, because Scientology wanted him to rat out what was happening with Lisa and her family and her friends. They would literally order him to be security checked. You know, this get on what they have, this lie detector e-meter thing that Scientology has, and they interrogate the person, not to find out in this case what he did. They're trying to find out through him what she's doing, what her friends are doing, what her husband or, you know, relationships are doing. And he felt really crappy about that. He's like, what am I supposed to do? I'm like caught in the middle of you know, being true to the person I work with and I like, and, you know, the church, you know, how do I walk the fine line here? And really, he couldn't walk the fine line. It was just ridiculous. And it's just indicative of Scientology and its creepy ways of maintaining and controlling its celebrities, just like Tom Cruise. I mean, everybody works for him as a Scientologist. Okay, good. So he thinks, oh, wow, you know, I got the best people and then blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you don't think those people are reporting back to David Miscavige every time he scratches his head? I mean, of course they are. Because they don't want to lose being a Scientologist, because they think Scientology is going to give them all these great things. You know, it's going to make them cause over matter, energy, space, and time, be able to recall their whole track for the last, you know, 100 billion years and all this stuff. It's all bullcrap, but if they're sold on it and they believe it, they don't want to lose that. And so they will betray whoever they're working for, like whether it's Tom Cruise or Marie Presley or whoever it is. They're going to betray those people and be reporting back to Miscavige, who's sitting there, you know, rubbing his hands together, controlling these people. So that's kind of how that whole thing goes down. Okay, so many crimes. Let me just think of some of them. Well, the Lisa McPherson, you got to see an example of how Scientology handles people who have psychotic breaks. And they lock them in a room, hold them against their will. They don't get medical help. They don't get any kind of outside help. Nobody's supposed to talk to them. They're supposed to just exhaust themselves, and then they're supposed to get some kind of auditing. L. Ron Hubbard, this is his little program saying that he had solved the solution to psychosis, and he knew exactly how to handle people with psychotic breaks. Well, I've seen that, and I've seen it many, many times, unfortunately. Many psychotic breaks of both staff and public, and the treatment is horrific. And like one example, when I got to the Rehabilitation Project Force, the RPF, in Los Angeles, I arrived there, what was it, 1984, and I was kind of like new to that RPF, so I didn't really have a lot of access to what got done in there or what was even happening in there. But I did see a guy named Bill Denton, and it's Denton, not Dendu, not to be confused with Bill Dendu. His name was Bill Denton. He was about 40 years old at the time, and he was considered to be having a psychotic break. He was talking with another RPF, this other girl, and they were kind of like starting to form a relationship, and they were thinking they knew each other from some other lifetime and whatever. It got to a point where somebody determined that this guy was starting to go into a psychotic break, and they got him to go down into this place that used to have boilers in it, down below the complex. It was a big concrete room. You had to go down these metal stairs to get down into it, and then these two metal doors could be closed behind it. And once you're down in there, you're screwed. You can't get out. You're like 20 feet, 25, 30 feet down in this big concrete box, basically. What was Bill Denton saying when he was down there? He was screaming, "Let me out of here." He was screaming with anybody would scream. He wasn't like talking some kind of insanity. He's saying exactly what a sane person would say who was held against their will and held in some kind of concrete box underneath the hospital complex in Los Angeles. You'd be demanding to be let out, and that wasn't going to happen. Nobody's going to hear you. You're under that complex. You're down in a concrete hole, and you're being held against your will. And if you weren't crazy, having a psychotic break to start with, after about a day, you are definitely having a psychotic break down there. And this guy was screaming and wanting out and all upset. And I mean, I feel bad. Looking back, yeah, of course you can say, why didn't you just call the police and get these guys like shut down? They're so nuts. But it's not your viewpoint when you're in there. You think somehow that you don't know nothing. You're thinking that, yeah, maybe Scientology does have the answers, or this is being done for some reason or whatever. I mean, you justify so much insanity to be able to be a Scientologist, to be in the Sea Org. And it's embarrassing. Yeah, you ask yourself a million times why you did what you did or allowed what you allowed and stuff like that. And, that's a big question that ex-members will ask themselves probably forever. And but I can tell you that Bill Denton, he exhausted himself just like you're supposed to on the program, and then they eventually what they would do, and what they did at Flag all the time, is after these guys got all exhausted down, they would literally drop them off on a doorstep of some family member and leave them there. Like, so over to you, your problem. And that's what happened to Bill Denton. That's the way he went. Another thing I should bring up is children. I mean, up until around 1986, the Sea Org, you were allowed to have babies there. After that, you could join the Sea Org, but your kid had to be at least 10 years old. But back in 1985, I was over at the Child Cadet Org, and the place was horrific. I mean, you would have people that would be given like 22-year-olds in some classroom setup where hard floors, hard walls, 20 little 2-year-olds running around, screaming, doing what 2-year-olds do. And this one person, when I was there, was like usually young girls. They'd be responsible for feeding them, washing them, dressing them, taking care of them from early morning to whenever their parents might return late at, in the evening or night. These girls were exhausted. These rooms were like the noise, you couldn't hardly stand in there. For me, it was like, oh my goodness, this is the worst job in the Sea Org. These poor girls, they're trying to keep up with all these little screaming kids. The place is a madhouse, and not good for the kids, not good for the people who are supposed to be taking care of them. And that was the situation that was happening in this child cadet org, they called, in Los Angeles, over by Celebrity Center. It's a building right next to the main Celebrity Center building. I remember when I got to the RPF in '84 in Los Angeles. Again, I just had arrived. I wasn't like somebody who was making decisions. And they had some guy, this little skinny, Weasley-looking dude with round glasses. He had been one of the people responsible for taking care of the little kids. And I don't know the specifics of it. I just know he got RPF for messing around with these little kids. And so he comes to the RPF, and we were doing a project at the time to replace all the shutoff valves in the main building, the 2-inch shutoff water valves, because they couldn't, they were so old they wouldn't shut the water off anymore. And to be able to work on the plumbing in the building, you needed to be able to use the shutoff valves. So we had the blueprints of the whole plumbing system and all that kind of stuff, and we're crawling around the attics replacing these valves. And then one night, this little scrawny dude, he doesn't show up. And nobody knows where he is. They figure he just took off. We go next morning. We have what we call the morning muster. Everybody lines up and gets accounted for. And this dude's in line, like nothing happened. So, of course, he's taken to find out, like, where were you last night? What he did, believe it or not, is using the blueprints of where the shutoff valves are and all that kind of stuff. He went up and he shut off the water to all the women's showers in the main complex, except for one shower. And this guy made a hole in the ceiling of that shower, and he spent the night up there peeping down through that hole as all these Sea Org women were lined up waiting to get their shower in his shower booth there. So when that was discovered, of course, now nobody had kicked him out of the Sea Org for monkeying with the kids, but of course all these Sea Org officers and stuff that had taken their shower in that thing, they wanted this guy's head. So, of course, he got kicked out of the Sea Org right there. But, I mean, it took that to get this guy kicked out. It wasn't enough that this guy was monkeying with the kids. It had to get personal to these actual Sea Org women before they would take that step. It's just indicative of the craziness in that joint. The other thing is, I know at Flag, you could pay for the kids to do work for you. Like for like if you're at division, you have like maybe a lot of filing, stuff like that. There was a price per hour for child labor at Flag, which means, and it would be put in a financial plan for the week. You want a whole bunch of, let's say you need 100 hours of filing to be caught up. Well, you would make a deal with the guys that ran the cadet org for the children. And, I mean, they needed money for their book supplies and their paper and their cleaning supplies and, whatever things they had. And how did they get their money? They're supposed to, Scientology is supposed to exchange something. Well, what do they have to exchange? They have the labor of these children. And so you'd say, okay, listen, I want to buy 100 hours this week, and you put it in a financial plan. You don't list it as child labor. You list it as you're giving money for cleaning supplies and administrative supplies for the children. It looks all good if somebody was going to pull the records out, but the fact is, no, you're paying for child labor, and those kids would be brought over, and usually it'd be like maybe 8 or 10 at a time, and they'd be put to the filing. And I can tell you, if those kids messed up and they got a bad report on them or some nonsense, they were in deep trouble with their own little organization, because their little organization depended on the ability to sell their labor to support their little organization, and that's a fact. And the other thing is the children. There's lots of minors that were being used on posts at Flag. I'll just say Flag, but this is all the Sea Org. And they would be told, you're not allowed to go out at night. You're not allowed to walk outside by yourself. They wanted to make sure there was no way a police officer or somebody was going to stop them to find out what were they doing at 10 o'clock at night, walking around downtown Clearwater or something like that. For them, they were just doing their job. They just going from one building to the other. So everything had to be done secretively. These kids were all, they knew they would, a van would be pulled up to transfer them from one building to the other, and they'd be behind the gate and the fence, and then when the van stopped, then they'd be ushered out and put in the van and moved to the next building to do whatever jobs they were doing and stuff. So you had Flag intentionally holding back information about child labor. Another thing, I mean, you had children as young as 13 years old going to adult rehabilitation project force (RPF) programs, and it's basically it's a labor camp. It's to adjust your thinking and your behavior. You're sent to these camps, and some people are there for more than 10 years. I know many people who spent more than 10 years in a row in one of these labor camps without being able to talk to their own children, their wife, or anything. They're totally cut off and controlled. They have to run everywhere they go. They have to eat the worst food. All this stuff. So you had minors. I mean, even that famous singer from Australia, Kate Ceberano. Her niece was 13 years old and was living in the RPF in Los Angeles, where all the adult women and men slept in the same little school house thing. It was only divided by a wall, but everybody slept on the floor on a piece of foam that they were given that had their name written on it with a magic marker. And there was only one bathroom in the place. So if you were a woman and you woke up at night to use the bathroom, you had to walk through where the men were laying on the floor sleeping. And I can tell you, it's very hot in Los Angeles, and people aren't necessarily going to cover themselves when they're sleeping. And it's not a place where you would bring a kid. You don't have a 13-year-old little girl living amongst adults in that situation and in that environment. And you're not going to school. You're out of school. School's not happening. You're doing the prisoner program. I mean, you had one kid at Flag. His name was Marco. His parents were in the Sea Org, and he was a minor, and he was in the RPF, and RPF were trying to bring up some building supplies up to Fort Harrison by they would stop the elevator on, like, say you stop the elevator on the second floor, and then you would force the doors open of the elevator on the third floor so you open it up and you're just seeing the elevator shaft. And below you is the top of the elevator that's sitting on the second floor. Well, they would put, the building supplies and stuff like that on top of that elevator, and then use that elevator to carry the materials up the building. Well, Marco, he's a kid. He's not, what do you know about elevators and all that stuff? So he's trying to balance himself by holding onto one of the cables. And you have rollers that roll up those cables, and it happens fast, and this kid lost his hand. He literally lost his hand. And it all gets covered up. Nobody's going to say, oh, yeah, it was because, he was in the RPF and he was trying to get building supplies. No, you come up with some bullcrap shore story. With Scientology, everything's a shore story. What do you tell the shore? What do you tell, the the people that aren't in the organization, what's your cover story basically. So they come up with some bull crap. Ulster will cover it up, and there's this kid Marco walking around with no hand, and they eventually got him out of the Sea Org and shipped him off, I guess, to some relative or whatever. Last I saw him, he didn't have a hand. He just kept a black leather glove on where his hand used to be. I mean, these kind of things happen in the Sea Org, and it all gets covered up, and it's whatever works best for Scientology. It's not what works best for someone else or an individual or a child or a baby or whatever. It has nothing to do with that. They just it's not how it works. So I mean, I can tell you horror stories forever, and I guess by now, if you're listening to this and you're following SPTV, you're following cases like the Danny Matheson trial and these kind of things, you're getting a pretty good concept of what Scientology will do to silence somebody, what Scientology will do to protect somebody, if it's in their interest. And that's probably a good point to end off for today. I got a lot more stuff I want to go over. I'm going to explain to you at some point that covers in detail how Scientology makes money. And then I'll also cover in detail how they spend that money. And that might be of interest to some people to know how that works. And I think even a lot of Scientologists will be very surprised. And I think a lot of Sea Org members will be very surprised, because you can be in the Sea Org for a lot of years and still not understand how things work. And it sounds crazy, but you tend to, you have your little job, your little statistic, your little area, and you're like a little hamster in a cage, and you're running to keep up with what you're supposed to do. And you really don't have the opportunity from a lot of these different jobs, a lot of posts, to find out about what happens in other places. I mean, you could literally work at the Fort Harrison and for 10 years and never go to the Sandcastle. There's a furniture shop about a mile down Fort Harrison Avenue from the Fort Harrison. I guarantee you it's 95% of the Sea Org members at Flag have never gone there, have no idea what's there, what happens there. Everything is very divided up. The information control is extreme. If somebody from the international base is going to go to Flag, like to help on an event, they get interrogated on the meter, the e-meter, the lie detector, to make sure they have no intention of saying anything that's happening on the base. They're told, if they say anything about what they know that goes on at the international base when they go to another base, they're immediately going to be declared a suppressive person, or at least put into the RPF for many, many years. And when they return, they're interrogated again. And that goes on from not just the international base down to Flag, but from Flag to other bases. Everything is compartmented. Everything is, you're not allowed to talk about what you know, what you see. If you do, there's a whole rat culture in Scientology where you're supposed to write reports on anything you see that, Scientology would want to be known or happen. And if you fail to do that, then you get the same penalty as the person who actually commits the crime or whatever. So people are just writing reports on themselves, on each other, even on themselves. That's true too, all the time. It's a nutty environment, and that's kind of how it goes in that joint. So, all right, that gives you a little bit to chew on for today. We'll get into some more stuff as we go. I have a lot of information that other people might not have, and you might not be able to find other places. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening. We want to expose Scientology, their crimes, their nonsense, and hopefully get the tax exemption taken away, hopefully put some people in prison, hopefully get some people that would have been victims of Scientology to stay away from Scientology, because they would have the information of what actually happens there. So subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. Hit the like button, these kind of things, and support all the different channels of SPTV. All right, talk to you more later. Bye-bye.